Morning, Paul. I'll just ask this nice and open-ended. What can you tell us about the lineup? Who's in, who's not in tonight?
Lauren Brassoff plays goal. Eric Comrie is going to back up. I have both Poolman and Pionk out of the lineup tonight. I list them as more maintenance than anything else. And so I've got, and Harkins is in with the forwards. So the forwards really don't change. But that's the back end. We'll have Morrissey, Heinola, Forbert, DeMello, and Stanley and Benn in it.
We'll go next to Ken Weeb from Sportsnet. Go ahead, Weber.
Thanks, Gregor. Morning, Paul. Just a slight pivot. Eric Comrie is the Jets Masterton nominee. What stands out to you when you think of Eric Comrie?
Just a consistent may not even be a strong enough word. He's unrelenting in his positivity. I mean, with everything he's been through this year, it's not just that he had to go through those things that he was nominated. It's the way that he handles his every day here. He'll stay on the ice as long as you want. He's got how you doing today, Eric? Awesome. Everything's great. And he lives it, right? He's just an incredibly positive person. He's been in a most difficult situation. He would have handled it and been a leader in that with our extra players, because that's a tough job those guys have had this year. He's out there every day going so hard that those guys are certainly drawn to him. He's just a marvelous young man.
We'll go next to Paul Friesen from the Winnipeg Sun. Go ahead, Paul.
Thanks, Gregor. Hey, Paul, how hard is motivation, you think, these last few games, and how do you address it?
So emotion is the challenge here, right? So, they worked hard in the last game. There weren't guys cheating. But it's kind of like no play fighting in hockey. You're either going at it swinging or you're not. And that's, you see it in these games, especially if there's no place to move. You've got teams that want to do it right. So they're running their routes right. But the best part about the game of hockey is the emotion that's in it, right? And you take the fans out of that as well. You don't even have an external driver, right? So it all has to become internal. So the most important thing for us right now is that we aren't cheating our routes, that you're not, I would find a more politically correct term, you're not passing your problems on to somebody else because you haven't done the job that you needed to do. I mean, we ran our routes the way we were supposed to. We did our jobs, but there wasn't that emotion in the game. And we've got to find a way to get some of it in the game. Sometimes the other team will bring that to you, right? So you'll get into those games where they're fighting for something and that will bring it out. But that's our challenge in these last three. We haven't seen Van in a long time since they went through everything they went through. So there's almost not even that rivalry that there wasn't in the last game either. There's always a little bit in Calgary, but after that game got to 2-0, there wasn't. I think that might be, I thought earlier in the year, we saw some huge scores, lopsided scores. There's a 9-0 or something in there. And I thought that was part of it. It was so hard for one of the teams to get that emotion back because you're not having the fans in the building is makes it very difficult to get wired up for these games. So we've got to find it inside, and that's a challenge, but that's our job.
We'll go to Paul Friesen for a follow-up. Go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to ask if that emotional aspect can be flipped with a switch, maybe easier than routes and habits and all those things, which you'd like to.
Yeah, I mean, the environment brings the emotion an awful lot of times, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think when you get close to this game, and even our last game with Toronto, it might be our first round opponent. I think there's going to be more emotion in that game, even though you might have 20 guys trying to make sure they don't get hurt, but there's still going to be more there, right? It's environmental in a lot of ways. We played with, even in some of the games that we lost, there's an awful lot of emotion. We just weren't very good in that stretch. But in the last game, that's what I felt. It hasn't been season long by any means, but in the last game, I felt there wasn't a lot of emotion in there. I thought going into the game, I was worried about it with the things that had stacked up in the last game that we kind of passed. And we need to get a little bit more going tonight.
We'll go next to Sarah Orleski from TSN. Go ahead, Sarah.
Well, when you look at how goals have been hard to come by for your group, and I know that there's been more of a commitment to try to get the defensive side of the game going. how do you judge a line, like say Scheifele's line, beyond just goals? What do you look for? What could you look at as saying that line is playing well, as opposed to just looking at it from a statistical standpoint?
Yeah, and I almost never do that, right? Get off the bench and say they scored 2 or 3, so they were great, even if they weren't. It's dominance of a line against the line. If you're in a hard match, are you better than the line that you're playing against? We haven't been in a particularly hard match of late, but you're looking for your best players to be better than their best players, and it's what you give. So we track a lot more even in between periods. We know what one line's done against the other line in terms of chances for and against. And if it's red, we're not happy. If it's green, we are. Like, we're looking for an advantage period over period by the team they're playing against. And a lot of times that you're playing against your best against their best. So your expectation isn't that you're going to go out and dominate the other team's best. You just have to be better than they are. You have to create a bit more than you give up. And that's how I measure those lines.
We'll go back to Sarah Oleski for a follow-up. Go ahead, Sarah.
Then, Paul, what have you thought of the play of the Scheifele line in the last couple of games?
They're starting to get that offensive zone time that we're used to seeing from that line. The rush chances and we would be a fairly high rush chance team. We generate a fair amount. Those chances start to disappear as you get closer to the playoffs, and they really, unless the Calgary game, they had a bunch of breakdowns. We got breakaways, 2-on-1, scored goals on those. Those are the breaks, right? That's when, so they make a mistake, somebody falls down, they lose coverage, your goalie makes a great save, and you're in the middle of a transition on the other way. The rest of the game is just a grinder, and it gets to the end zones, and that's where the game was lost by us. We had possession of the puck twice in our end of the ice and gave it up, and the shot tipped us twice. So that line is starting to get some extended zone time. It's part of the reason why we're looking at Pionk and Morrissey together with them, because they can extend some of that zone time when they're out there together. So they're starting to look like they have in the past.
We'll go next to Kelly Moore from 680 CGOB. Go ahead, Kelly.
Hey, Paul, I know coaching gives you the right to change your mind, but Saturday, I don't know the exact quote, but it was something along the lines of, you were going to stay with these lines now. And yet yesterday we see 2 of the 4 change. So what caused that, Paul?
So I think it's more line theory than necessarily the lines. Like, each line has kind of a job and what they're supposed to do. So there's certain players that you can, I don't feel that changing Kopp and Stastny changed the definition of the line. Their roles haven't changed by that. And there's still one more change I may have to consider. And a lot of that will depend on where Nick Ehlers is in terms of where we play Matty Perreault and who plays on the right side, things like that. But I changed a couple of guys, but didn't actually change what the lines do and what they're expected to do. So if you take Kyle Connor and you move him and you play him with Lauer, you've changed your lines. Or if you're starting to move all those other pieces around. But a flip between Kopp and Stastny really doesn't change the role of the line or what they're expected to do.
And final question to Mike McIntyre from the Free Press. Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks, Gregor. Paul, just on all 3 of those guys, Poolman, Pionk, and Hellebuyck, I know you told us yesterday Hellebuyck would be in if it was the playoffs. Would you say the same about Pionk and Poolman, that if it was started?
Yeah, for sure. And once these things get healed up, I'll tell you what they are, so you know what I'm talking about. These are minor things that if you clean up right away, you never have to talk about them again. And then if you don't, you're going, why didn't you clean those things up? All injuries can get big. These things aren't. Both Pionk and Poolman came to the rink today with the idea that they were playing tonight. I got a really, really really high threshold on how well they have to be feeling to get into the lineup tonight. And it was close to that. They both, and I just said, no, you're not playing tonight. So that's coach's decision, and it's all about health.
And final follow-up to Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
And then just on that point, Paul, maybe it isn't how you drew it up, but is there some advantage to being able to get a game now where you can see Logan and Ville and Jordy, 3 guys that maybe weren't regulars at the start of the year here, all at the same time?
Yeah, and on their offsides, right? So now we'll have Jordy and we'll have Ville play their offside tonight. So the advantage is that they get to show what they can do kind of against the same team. because sometimes you walk away and say, hey, that guy was great tonight, but it won't translate necessarily to a different style of game. So we'll get them all against the same team. I think they're going to forecheck real hard tonight. Vancouver always has. So those guys will be on display in terms of breaking the puck out and defending.